Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate you taking the time. We're going to give just about 15, 20 more seconds. We've got a lot of people that are still logging on. It's fantastic to see the amount of people that are joining today. Right now, we're at over almost 250 people. It really shows your dedication to your communities and to the industry, so we appreciate it very much. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. I want to thank everyone for joining today for our webinar, Insurance Risks and COVID-19. My name is Paul Schwartz, and I'm the Business Development Director at First Service Residential, and I'm joined today by Jamie George, the Vice President of Insurance at First Service Financial. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. First, as with any technology platform and webinar that we're all experiencing today, sometimes a little bit more than we hoped, there's definitely a potential for technical difficulties. So while obviously we don't anticipate any at this time, we appreciate your patience if they do arise. So also feel free to take notes. But keep in mind, though, that the webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out the full webinar and the link in the days following. Lastly, again, as we're all experiencing nowadays, please keep your phones or your microphones muted during the webinar. You'll have an opportunity to submit questions at the end of the presentation via the chat box. So presenters for today, as I mentioned, I will be your moderator. Paul Schwartz, Business Development Director of First Service Residential. I've been in the industry going on 23 years. I'll be joined today by Jamie George. We're going to be sharing some best practices today and answering your questions regarding the impact of COVID-19 on HOA insurance. So as First Service Residential really is all about community, and as the leading residential property management company in North America, our business really is building and managing happy, healthy, expertly run communities. The spread of the coronavirus is something that obviously we take very seriously. And during these challenging times, our core values inform the decisions that we are making, and our unwavering commitment to our associates, our clients, communities, and partners definitely remains true during these times. So as we adapt to the current challenges of the pandemic, our goal, as we're doing now, is to share the best practices to keep your community's best interests in mind, keep the board safe, and keep the community members safe as well. So I also wanted to take just a minute to share a quick legal disclaimer. So this webinar is being provided for information purposes only, and of course does not constitute legal advice. So now that that is out of the way, I would like to introduce Jamie. Jamie, why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Paul. I'm so happy to be here with you today, and I'm happy to be able to share my 28 years of commercial insurance experience with you. I've been with First Service Financial for the past 9 years, and I've been working hard to bring our mission, which is to work with brokers and carriers to bring clients the value by bringing the best, broadest coverage that's available to community and condominium associations.
Great. Thank you, Jamie. 28 years of experience should be able to bode well during this conversation, so we appreciate it very much, and thank you for taking the time to be here. So for the agenda today, we based it on a lot of questions that we're getting from both current clients and prospective clients. So the agenda topics that we're going to be talking about today are association exposure and common questions, risk mitigation and best practices, claims processing, how a pandemic impacts the insurance market, and then, of course, as I mentioned, we'll roll into questions and answers through the chat capability on the webinar. And then finally, we'll leave you at the end with a resources page where you'll be able to get a link in order to go to the library of COVID materials that our teams internally have put together, as well as our website. So why don't we go ahead and get into it. We're going to start with association exposure and common questions. Okay, Jamie, so if you can tell us, are contaminated surfaces considered property damage, and are they covered by insurance policies?
Thanks, Paul. That's a great question. Unfortunately, the simple and short answer is most likely no. The definition of property damage is something tangible that needs to be repaired or replaced. So, I mean, this is my opinion, but a contaminated surface probably isn't going to qualify as that, because you can come in, you can clean it up, and you can essentially decontaminate it, and it's not going to be replaced or repaired. So therefore, no, a contaminated surface, again, in my opinion, is not going to be considered property damage under the definition of the property damage in the policies.
Okay, so that's a strike there. What about lost revenues for our associations? You know, a lot of our communities, some of them have golf courses, restaurants, boutiques, pubs, things of that sort. Are those lost revenues? Is there coverage for those under insurance?
So, Paul, I'm really glad you asked this question. This is one of the biggest misconceptions taking place today, is that this coverage is going to be available. This is a coverage that's triggered when there's a covered loss. So it has to be a covered peril. So unfortunately, as we just discussed above, when there's no real tangible property damage, it hasn't triggered, there's no covered loss. There's not a peril that's covered. So it's not going to trigger that business interruption coverage. But I'd like to take that a step further and share with you that this is still a really important coverage for insureds to carry, because in the event of a covered loss, let's say a fire or water damage as examples, and it shuts that business down for say 6 to 8 months, that cafe or that restaurant or that golf course. You know, they're going to lose those funds, that revenue during that time of being closed from those covered perils. And during that scenario, that line of business interruption coverage is going to apply, and it's going to be applicable, and it's going to be available.
What about pollution? As some of our communities or prospects have a pollution policy, do you think there's like a potential for coverage related to COVID-19?
So, Paul, this is another kind of tricky question. So I'm going to say if an association is actually carrying a pollution policy, I say that because, you know, in my experience, there's very few associations that actually carry a pollution policy. It's really going to vary policy by policy of, does that pollution policy carry an exclusion for virus and or bacteria? A lot of them I've read actually do have an exclusion there. A lot of the typical pollution policies available to associations today in the market are meant to be for chemical leakage, underground storage leakage, things of that nature. So they actually do contain a virus or bacteria exclusion. But with that being said, if you don't have the exclusion, there is a potential that there could be coverage under that if you carry that type of coverage.
So moving on then to general liability, workers' comp, directors, officers policy. Is there coverage for board members if they're sued for not closing common areas or something related to common areas?
So I hate to keep repeating myself, Paul, but I mean, I think, again, it depends on your policy. I've been reading a lot of these policies lately, D&O, and it's a mixed bag. Some actual D&O policies contain an exclusion for virus and bacteria, which really kind of surprised me, but it's there. So what that means is if that exclusion's there, any lawsuit that you get that has an allegation of that type of, you know, related to a virus or bacteria, there's not going to be coverage. But I can tell you this, I have read some that don't have an exclusion. Therefore, in my opinion, if you have those allegations and you don't have the exclusion, you will have coverage. It'll defend you. Whether you're liable or not is going to be a different story.
So what about coverage under the directors and officers general liability policy? If the association maybe is sued due to the spread of the virus, something of that sort, is there coverage for that?
So that would probably more fall under the general liability, and my answer is going to be somewhat similar to the D&O. First, it's going to depend on your carrier and the policy, and if you actually have a virus bacteria exclusion. Honestly, some do, some don't, even on the GL side. Right now, from what I'm reading, it's like a 50-50 shot whether you have that exclusion or not. It really varies carrier by carrier. And I've even seen some carriers that have an exclusion in one policy, but they don't have it in another. So let's take that maybe a step further, and let's go over a scenario where, let's say you don't have the exclusion in your general liability policy. And for whatever reason, during this pandemic, you kept your association gym open. And now homeowners actually filed a lawsuit with allegations that they caught COVID-19 from the HOA gym. So again, if you do not have the exclusion in your GL, they're going to pay to defend that lawsuit. Whether you're liable or not, that's a whole nother scenario. It's a whole another question, but the defense would be there. We can go into whether you're liable or not. I think that's going to be very hard to prove whether you caught it from that particular place. But again, if we can take that yet another step further and say there's an outbreak and all of a sudden 6 members are sick that went to that HOA gym last week, well, then we might have a little bit more of a liability issue, and maybe we do have some liability. But at the end of the day, if you don't have that exclusion, you will at least be defended in those allegations. It could potentially have liability there if you are found liable.
Okay, and then how about if an employee contracts COVID-19? So can the employee claim benefits under workman's comp?
So this is another great discussion, Paul, and it's my answers are very similar to what I've said under the general liability and the D&O. It's going to be hard to prove that that's the location that employee picked up that virus from. So right now, how it stands with the work comp carriers and insurance companies is the proof is on the employee. The employee needs to prove that that is the location that they got COVID at. So there are some states and some legislation going on right now where the states would like to pull that back and flip it and have it be on the proof of the employer to prove that the employee did not get it at their location. That hasn't taken place yet. So as of right now, today, it's still, that employee is still going to have some sort of proof that that's where they caught the virus. And my opinion, I'm not an attorney, but it's going to be very hard to prove that that's where you picked up COVID-19. Again, unless we had an outbreak and you got 6 employees sick, and then that's a whole nother story.
All right, so moving on then, so to risk mitigation and best practices. What should board members think about as they're making decisions due to the virus and the pandemic?
So again, Paul, not to repeat myself, but my first advice is to always follow all CDC, state, and local guidelines when governing your associations. Follow those guidelines. And I mean, my best advice to the board members is don't feel pressured by your homeowners to reopen your amenities when you know it's not the right thing to do, or when you know the association is not prepared to take on that sort of risk. You're not prepared for it. You don't have your cleaning supplies. You don't have any procedures in place. So just do the right thing and follow your guidelines is my best advice.
So as both the federal and local agencies start to lift the restrictions, what do you think boards should do to ensure compliance and mitigate risk?
Well, I think boards need to think about the restrictions that have been advised. I'll throw out an example. If your state's advised you, you know what, let's go ahead and open community pools, HOA pools at 25% occupancy, the board really needs to look at, what does that look like for them? How will they monitor that? And they need to have written procedures in place. They need to make sure they have their cleaning supplies and their operations written out and how they're going to handle it. Do they need extra staff to ensure that they're only at 25% capacity? Or are they not able to ensure this and maybe they shouldn't be opening? I think it's just really important that they have these plans and procedures in place and then they implement them, that they're ready to go before they open, and that they document everything that they've decided to do in their board meetings, in their board minutes, in procedures, written procedures. That's my best advice to them.
Document them.
Correct. Absolutely.
So as an organization, obviously as the managing agent for all the communities that we're partnering with, our board members have been getting guidance from us and expect guidance from us. For those of you that are joining us that are not with First Service Residential, hopefully your management providers have been guiding you through this pandemic as well. One of the things that we're rolling out now that, again, those that are not with First Service, you should definitely ask for guidance from your current provider about reopening amenities. So we're rolling out to all of our boards that have amenities is 2020 COVID-19 outbreak orders lifted guide. And some of the things that are in there that we're advising the clients on, again, that everyone should expect, as a recommended phased approach overview. This is just a table of contents that I'm reading from, but the pre-opening recommendations, a hierarchy of controls, eliminating or reducing the virus from the community, substitution protocols, controls, personal protective equipment, communication, reopening steps, recommended phased approach, and details for that. Well, all those things, again, as a management provider, we feel very strongly that we should be advising all of our clients and our partners, and other management companies should be doing the same. So if you're not getting that already, make sure, please, that you reach out to them, to management providers, and ask them for those guidance, and then ask them for something in writing that you can follow sort of as a guide. All right, so moving on to the claims process. So Jamie, what is recommended in regards to documenting the claim submission?
Sure, Paul. I know I've made it look pretty bleak for the possibility of there being any coverage for a claim, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you won't have a scenario that you do need to report a claim. And then that case, that type of event, I would recommend that, document your timeline of events, documentation from board decisions, again, those detailed meeting minutes, detailed written procedures, timeline of events. When did you open at 25%? When did you open at 50%? Things of that nature. When did you allow guests back in? Keep those written down because you're not going to be able to remember them later. Your cleaning procedures. I know that we're all taking extra cleaning procedures right now. So document those, write those down. Keep track of extra cleaning supplies that you've purchased or the extra expense of those cleaning supplies. Reporting procedures, have a reporting procedure in place that for your communities, if there is an event that someone needs to report, how do they go about that? And then expense tracking. I would recommend keeping track of all these expenses, maybe just even in an Excel sheet. If you have your manager or your treasurer or something of that nature do it, just to keep different columns. Did you have to have extra staff to help? Again, did those cleaning supplies cost extra funds? Did you need more of them? What else did you need to keep the security of your association? Document, document, document.
That's kind of the prevailing tone. I think the biggest takeaway today: document, document, document. Okay, so let's kind of look into maybe a little crystal ball and talk about how the pandemic is going to impact the insurance market. Obviously, we don't know. Obviously, you can tell us that there's been some adjustments already, Jamie. But so prior to COVID-19, there weren't really a lot of protocols in place when it comes to pandemic and biologics and things of that sort. So what do you think the future holds when it comes to being best prepared for future changes?
So that's another great topic that you bring up, Paul. So we've already been seeing general liability and property rates increasing over the past, I'd say, 6 to 8 months due to the past few years of natural disaster losses, not only in the West, but in the entire United States and in the entire world, actually. And that's something that I think we all need to remember as well, is insurance is not just tied to your global market or your national market. It's a world market. It's a global market. So we need to take all those world events into account. So the market's already been hardening, and COVID-19 has just, in my opinion, it's going to make it even harder for the market. So I think we're going to continue to see increasing property rates, general liability rates, probably across all lines of insurance, to be honest with you. I think underwriting criteria is going to tighten. The current status of carriers issuing quotes, I know has been a real challenge for a lot of brokers and clients. I mean, prior to COVID, we were seeing quotes released maybe, 40 to 45 days prior to the renewal date. Now we're seeing that carriers not releasing quotes until the 30-day mark. Some are doing it even less than the 30 days. They're doing it at 21 days. They're just not releasing even those renewal offers prior to that. Why? Because they're just kind of watching and seeing what's happening to our world right now. And they're changing their coverage forms. It's also attempting to obtain a new business quote from a new carrier. They're not wanting to release the quotes either more than 30 days before. And then the other thing I've ran into is sometimes I have clients that would like to midterm shop, which is, during the policy period. Most carriers I approach right now for a midterm shop tell me come back at your renewal. We're not doing any midterm quoting right now. So it's changed the market a lot, and it's changing on a daily basis. And I think it's going to continue to change and continue to harden.
So this was, Jamie, when we were running through, kind of doing a run through of this yesterday, that's the one thing that really stood out to me from a board and from a manager standpoint is that, a lot of boards in the past, they want to see those quotes, at least 60 days, maybe 90 days prior to the insurance renewal so they can review it and talk about it, make decisions, things of that sort. So that's going to be a huge impact on boards and the managers if they're not able to get those quotes, until 21 days before renewal, or like you said, maybe on the outside chance 30 days. So that is definitely something that obviously our managers are aware of and going to be aware of, but we need to make sure that we communicate that to boards. And that's possibly something that can be calendared where, possibly 2 weeks before your insurance renewal, you want to make sure that you already have a meeting scheduled, an open board meeting, to make sure that you're ready and lined up to review and approve. So
Agreed, Paul.
That's a big takeaway.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say too. I know this is going to be boards in positions where they feel like they're up against the wall before their renewal date. So, just some of my suggestions to them is, be discussing with your brokers then before your renewal. That renewal is not going to come until right before the renewal date. So if you know that you already have some concerns with your coverage, or you have some specific questions or something you may be concerned with, or you're concerned about exclusions or something of that nature, have those discussions with your brokers prior to your renewal, so that when they bring forth your renewal and you feel like you're crunched and it's only 21 days, hopefully it's coming to you correct with the coverage that you wanted the first time out of the gate, and you're not having to go back and change your coverages. So just be having those conversations with your brokers, or if you're with a management team, then be consulting your insurance team.
So I would say then, obviously for our managers, Jamie and her team are a huge resource for us because, they have an internal insurance department. But for those that are not with First Service, I would highly recommend that you talk with your managers or possibly the regional directors or however the structure is set up to see if they have an internal insurance department that can guide you and advise you. If not, as Jamie said, you probably have to reach out directly to the broker. So that's something important as well. Okay, so let's go to questions and answers. We've got a couple flowing in already, but if everybody can go to the chat function. You should see it somewhere on your screen. For some screens it's at the bottom, some screens it's at the top. But any questions that you have for Jamie, why don't you go ahead and type those in. We've got a couple that have come in already. So this one is, as a manager, am I covered under the general liability and D&O coverage?
So that's a great question. With a loaded answer, as long as there's you are covered as an additional insured under both policies. However, if those policies contain exclusions, they're going to apply to the manager as well.
Okay. So that's kind of a plus. All right, so another one. One of the residents has threatened to sue me and the association because we are not opening the fitness center. Should this be reported to the insurance company?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Anytime you get a threat of a lawsuit, someone actually threatens to sue you, you need to report it to your directors and officers carrier, and let them determine whether you have the exclusion or have coverage or not. But protect your coverage by reporting it to your carrier, because there is a clause in a D&O policy that any written communication that you are aware of within 90 days, you need to report that to the carrier, a threat of a potential claim. So protect your coverage, and yes, report it to your carrier. Absolutely.
Okay. Next one. Is there going to be coverage for virus/bacteria pandemics in the future? Do you think carriers will add this coverage? I think based on your comments earlier, my vote, I'll bet $1 on no. But what's your professional opinion?
Well, you'd win, Paul. You would win your money there, because that's just my
Excellent.
opinion. Again, I'm not an attorney, but I don't think they'll be adding any coverage for it. And unfortunately, I think the ones that have the coverage in there that don't have the exclusion right now, I think we're going to see coverage changes to the coverage forms, terms and conditions, and that I think at the end of the day, we'll probably end up with exclusions everywhere.
Okay. All right. Another question. As a board, if we tell the management company to follow governor and CDC guidelines to open or close facilities, and they do not comply, forget to, or for whatever reason, who takes on that liability?
So, I mean, that's a very specific question. So I'm going to go on the premise of the board in writing told, it was in board minutes, advised the management company to close facilities, open facilities, whichever way it was. If the management company didn't do that, I mean, to me, again, not an attorney, but I think the liability is probably going to fall on that management company if they were directed by the board to do something and didn't do it.
Okay. Waiting for a couple other questions to come in.
So I've had a question come in on my side, Paul. How do we determine when it's safe to open the pool and spa? So again, that's kind of a difficult one, but it's following your local, state, and city guidelines. So I'm over quite a bit of territory, and I'll just share with you that I do have one territory that their county guidelines have said that they can reopen their pools at 25% capacity. I have some clients that have decided they're going to do it because they're going to take on that responsibility of monitoring the 25%. And I have some clients that have said, we do not have the capability to monitor that. We don't want to be responsible for it, and we can't be liable for it, so we're not going to reopen. So I think it's really an individual association choice, a board choice, and what resources they have and what they can handle and what they can't, and what their county, states, and cities are telling them to do or can do.
Okay, excellent. All right, I've got one here. How should an HOA homeowners who choose to go into closed areas that have clear signs that the area is closed? So what happens if the area and amenity is closed, but people go in anyway?
Oh my goodness, I haven't ran across that one yet, but I mean, I would say you immediately have to go and ask them to move, to leave that area. And I mean, you're coming down I mean, they're breaking the rule. If you clearly have a sign posted that you are not to be in this area, and they are, I mean, I hate to say this, Paul, but if they don't listen to you and leave and keep repeating, you may even have to get local authorities involved in that type of situation.
Yeah. So the liability to a certain extent is waived because there are signs or warnings that are posted.
It helps your liability, but that's one thing about liability, Paul, is at the end of the day, you can post signs, you can do this and do that, and you can still have some potential liability there. But but you do everything you can to try and protect yourself. So if you have a sign up that says it's closed, then that's closed, and you've done the most you can to close it. But I would also hope that somehow that closed area has been locked and been made so that you cannot access it.
Yeah.
So again, if you keep accessing it, there's been some kind of forcible entry there then, and you should probably get your local authorities involved.
Okay. I've actually got a question that I just thought of, and it kind of goes back to the lack of timeliness that the managers are going to be able to get the bids. Our managers typically start to do the budgeting process basically over the summer. They get started no later than August. Are you able to just give us a guesstimate now? If we're not able to get those actual quotes in until late, for budgeting purposes for 2021, would you say that we need to factor in a 10% increase on the insurance line item, a 20% increase? What do you think is a good rule of thumb?
And that's really a tough question because I don't have a crystal ball. And I mean, I'll share with you, I told my clients last fall after speaking with all the carriers, my best case scenario to tell them to budget was probably a 10% increase. And then unfortunately it shook out as more of a 15. I don't want to scare anybody right now, but I think if you really want to be realistic, you should be budgeting for, anywhere from a 15 to 20% increase. If you want to be realistic. And
Yeah.
I know personally, I'd rather budget more and come in under than be short my funds.
Okay. All right. So another question here. What is the right policy for upcoming events? We have an annual 4th of July parade and party in our Central Park. What is the appropriate board position regarding this event?
Oh my goodness, someone hit on one of the things that scares me the most, Paul, special events. Special events are really, really tricky, especially if you're talking about a parade and a park and such. You really need to talk to your broker. You need to, special events are so tricky. I don't know what you're doing or what kind of events are going to be here. So you're having a parade, but are you having booths? Are you having vendors? Are you having alcoholic beverages? All those things are very scary things in the insurance world to someone like me who just sees risk everywhere I go. So I think you really need to have a conversation with your broker. You need to tell them share with them everything about this event so that they can tell you whether your current policy is broad enough to cover it, which very doubtful it is, and that you're going to need a special events policy for that one-day event.
Okay, so special events policy for that one-day event.
Yes, there is a thing called a one-day special event policy, a 3-day, however long your event is, but there is a special events policy. I don't want to yak too much about First Service Residential, but again, we do have an insurance team, and we actually have a questionnaire that we use when an association approaches us and says that they're going to have an event, so that we can get all the particulars about that and then look at their policies and see whether they have an exposure or not.
Okay, all right, great. Okay, so any other questions, Jamie, that came in on your end? I'm not seeing anything on mine.
I do have one more on my end. If our board gets more involved in giving direction to mitigate infection risk to maintenance staff, do we increase risk of becoming a co-employer? In my opinion, I really don't think so. I'm going to go under the premise that this question is asked with a management company behind that maintenance staff, because otherwise you'd already be the employer. So I'm going to say, again, my opinion, not an attorney, but my opinion is no, it really doesn't increase your risk as a co-employer because you're already giving direction to management company as to how to operate your associations. Management companies are there and carry out the direction of the board, basically. And they should be speaking back if they think you're not doing something properly. That is a conversation you should be having with your managers and maybe their supervisors if you're having any conflict there and you aren't seeing eye to eye with something in regards to mitigating that risk infection.
Okay. All right. Another question here, and I think Jamie, you got this one also, but if you were only able to have vendors clean gym and pool once a day, is it best to just keep them closed?
Oh, I mean, this is again just a personal opinion, Paul. Um, but if it was just once a day, to me, I don't think that's a good idea. I think guidelines are going to dictate that surfaces are cleaned more often than that. And so I think that could be a real potential issue. But
Yeah.
again, we need to be
Well,
following the guidelines.
yeah, and that would be my thought also is whatever the CDC guidelines are, either follow those, and as Jamie said before, make sure you're documenting. But if you're not able to follow those guidelines, then that puts you at a huge risk with a huge liability. So I would say if you're not able to afford it or find a company to do it, what have you, obviously work with your management partner on that. But if you cannot follow those CDC guidelines to the letter, then yeah, don't do anything with those amenities. All right, another question. How should we handle a homeowner that says they have a disability that requires that they be able to use the fitness center, which of course is closed, due to their rehabilitation?
So that's a really tricky one, but I'm gonna say we have to stick with, again, following all the guidelines. If we've closed our fitness center because that's what our state, local, city, whatever guidelines require us to do, that's the bigger issue there. I mean, unfortunately, I think a lot of us have a lot of needs that are required that aren't being met due to the current pandemic. But I think the overall picture here is the board needs to do the right thing for the group, for the association. And that is that facility is closed and it will remain closed until guidelines say we can open it.
Yeah.
And
And
I
I would
think
say
if,
also, I know that physical therapy offices, orthopedics are still open. So
right,
possibly a short-term solution is to talk with the doctor, get a prescription for therapy, and then they should be fine.
correct. I mean, and we can even take that one step further. Let's say they file a lawsuit of allegations that, they were deprived of it. And let's say the DNO didn't have an exclusion, so we have coverage. I mean, to me here, the HOA did the right thing. So, if we didn't have an exclusion and we had coverage, that DNO would defend them. Are they liable and didn't do the right thing? That's going to be up for the courts to decide. My opinion, they did the right thing. They're not liable.
Right. Right. Okay. All right. Two more here. Is the risk of any potential loss to the HOA significantly reduced by adhering to the state or state government executive order? I think that's a definite yes. But Jamie,
Yes.
you're the experience expert.
Yes. I mean, the more that you can prove that you followed all your city, state, local guidelines, county, whatever the case may be, the less the liability is going to be taken off you. You can show that you did everything that you were following the guidelines. Once you step out of those guidelines, then you might have some issues.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So how are you seeing different communities opening pools? Are they following state or county guidelines?
So I think I'm going to go back to the market I have that their state has allowed them to open at 25% capacity. I have a lot of clients that have said, we can't handle it. We don't even know what 25% looks like. So we're not going to do it. That being said, we have some that say, we really want to get these open for our homeowners. We're going to do the best we can at 25%. Their boards have really sat down, taken a look at the studies. They know what their capacities are. They know what 25% equates to. They've come up with plans of how they're going to do that. Some of them have come up with, you have to reserve a 2-hour spot at the pool. So I guess there's things that you can do. It just depends on how involved you and your board and management team can be, and how many resources you're willing to put towards it.
Yeah. Well, I would say also this goes back to what I mentioned a little bit ago, that reopening guide and what that looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you need to rely on your manager and your management provider to provide those guidelines and those parameters. We have an internal task force with legal experts, and Jamie's on there because she has 28 years of experience in insurance, and so we're using all of those disciplines, if you will, to kind of put together that opening guide. So that's something that you should be getting from your manager and your management company as well. Okay, some more questions here. Are we permitted to disable keys to the pool or spa to homeowners?
Well, I can only speak from experience. I personally live in an HOA, and that's what my HOA has done.
Yeah.
My key is disabled.
Well, I would say that
I can't get in there.
if that amenity is closed, then there's no reason to have access to it. So I would say an extra safeguard is to disable key fobs or what have you.
I agree.
Okay. So will liability waivers be sufficient in protecting the HOA from lawsuits?
They will help, but I'm a believer that liability waivers are great. I like them. I think they're fantastic, but they will only hold up so far as well. So I know I can't answer your question specifically because insurance is always gray, Paul, but waivers help. But are they going to reduce or eliminate your liability, I should say? I don't know that I would go that far. It's going to depend on all the circumstances and all the allegations and the circumstances surrounding each individual lawsuit, injury, whatever the case may be.
Okay. All right. Jamie, I think you've got a couple questions on your end. I hope that everybody is finding this helpful. These are a lot of good questions. Jamie, what do you have on your end?
I hope so too. I have one on my end. What is your advice regarding whether to have users of common area pools execute a waiver? I'm a member of a tennis club, and we only play if we've executed a waiver. Is this effective or just a false sense of security? So again, kind of the same answer to the last question, but just to elaborate, I mean, it's somewhat effective, but it's also that it's a little bit of both, but it's also a little bit of false sense of security because it's going to depend on the scenario of each individual claim. So I guess to make that simpler, always get a waiver if you can. They're great, but don't count on that it's going to protect you.
All right. Jamie, do you have any others on your end? Because I've got two more here.
I don't see any more on my end.
Okay. All right. So if your city COVID-19 restrictions are more strict than the governor's state restrictions, oh boy, do you recommend the most restrictive?
I personally would recommend the most restrictive. I mean, I know we're getting down to splitting hairs, but if we start have allegations flying at us, they're going to refer, I mean, just my experience, they're probably going to refer back to the most restrictive. So therefore, if you're looking to take your less path of exposure, go with the most restrictive.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's kind of like a finger pointing thing.
Yes.
Okay, has the state insurance commissioner been rewriting insurance rules?
They have been discussing it. However, I mean, some of them are wanting to go back and rewrite history, which I don't think is going to happen to bring some coverage into the play here, with all these exclusions and the business interruption and all things of that nature. There's been discussion of it, but I mean, again, my personal opinion, I don't think that will happen, but I don't know.
Okay. And then what if signs are posted and people remove them to enter an area anyway?
Oh my goodness, that would be awful. Okay, so just off the top of my head, I would think, if you're posting signs, we should have some documents of that we posted signs and on what day and things of that nature. So take a picture that they're taken down and keep putting them back up. I guess, and then the next thing, I don't know, that's hard to handle. Would be a horrible thing for someone to do. I guess document they're taken down. At that point, you may even want to send out a letter to your homeowner saying, look, someone out there is removing signs, and just in case we're not all aware, these areas are closed. We will keep putting signs back up, but in case it keeps happening, that might be another good way to cover your bases. If those signs keep disappearing, is to send out some sort of newsletter, email blast, something of that nature to all the homeowners.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, our managers they would do an email blast, they would do a text blast, and then if something was real emergent, then they could do like a robo type call, but only, in serious situations. But hopefully people don't come across that, but that was a question, so maybe they did. All right, so can an HOA be protected if we post to use the pool at your own risk?
Well, I mean, again, it's only going to put that false sense of security, and only a HOA liability is going to be removed there. I mean, I think we probably post things of that nature at all of our pools all the time that we hope to not be liable for it. So again, have it posted there, that's great. Kind of like the liability waiver. Do all these things, but it doesn't mean that your liability's been eliminated.
Okay, all right.
So I have one on my end, Paul, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So if we don't have pool staff to monitor or sanitize, should we either hire someone or not open the pool? Or can we post signs letting residents know that we are not monitoring or cleaning and they are taking a risk? Again, this is a real sticky one. I personally wouldn't recommend opening those pools until you can adhere to whatever your local, the most restricted guidelines are. So if you don't have the staff, or you can't monitor, or you can't take care of that, my personal advice would be to not open that pool. You can put signs out there that you're taking it at your own risk and that you're not doing this and you're not doing that, but it doesn't mean that someone can't come back and throw some allegations at you and sue you, and that you're still not going to have to defend yourself in that lawsuit.
Okay. I don't have any more on my end. Jamie, do you have anything that's come through?
I do have one. It sounds like directors cannot avoid possible liability under D&O, GL, etc. Why should I continue this huge risk to me and my family? I think that's a great question. I think there's a couple of things we need to look at. I mean, quite honestly, before this pandemic, I don't think there were a whole lot of probably what we'd call holes in coverage for directors, under the D&O and under the GL. But Paul, this pandemic is completely unprecedented. We haven't been here before. So, it's hard. It's hard for me to answer that question for you. I think just being aware of your exposures. Now we're obviously all aware of what a virus, bacteria, and a pandemic can do to us, and the exposures it can open up to us and our associations. But then the other thing I say is, when you're renewing your policies, be having discussions with your brokers about exclusions, about about where your gaps may be, so that at least if you're still gonna do that awesome duty that we think you all do as board members, and continue on your board, you'll at least know where some of your exposures may lie.
Okay. All right. Any other questions that anyone wants to submit?
I have one more that just came through to me personally because I couldn't get through on the chat. It says, I see in our package policy that there is an exclusion titled fungi or bacteria exclusion, and it discusses loss based on basically inhalation of fungi or bacteria inside of the building. Can we associate this to also be referring to a virus bacteria exclusion you mentioned earlier? Or is this exclusion you're referring to very specific to referencing viruses? And I'm going to say no, this is exactly what I'm referring to. Fungi, bacteria, things of that nature. That exclusion listed in that policy is also going to expand over to this virus.
Okay. I've got one that just came over. Will a release of liability from each member protect the association?
Again, very similar to earlier. I always recommend them. They're great to have, but it doesn't eliminate your liability. I think that's where a lot of people get a false sense of hope that if we get a waiver of liability, that we're out of it, that it's taken all the pressure off of us. And that's unfortunately simply not the case.
Okay.
I have
All
another
right.
one on my end, Paul. Can we threaten to advise the community of any owners that break reopening rules and cause the amenities to be closed again?
Wait, Jamie, I don't know about everybody else. I didn't hear it that clearly. Can you repeat it?
I can. Can we threaten to advise the community of any owner that breaks reopening rules and causes the amenities to be closed again? I'm not
Oh,
sure what they're wanting to threaten them with, but I would be very, very careful about that. Very careful about taking someone's privileges away from using amenities that they live in that community. I would be very careful about that. And it's going to depend on what, a lot of what your bylaws say, CCNR say, and things of that nature, whether you can, what your recourse can be.
okay. All right. I've got no more questions on my end. Jamie, do you have anything on yours?
I do.
Oh,
I have
hold on.
more.
All right, you go ahead. One
Okay.
just came through. Go ahead. You go.
Do you have any thoughts on proceeding with the planned capital improvement for a common area that we have closed? I.e. giving contractors opportunity to access an unpopulated area to facilitate progress? Ooh, that's a very tricky question. I could go either way with this, to be honest with you, because I break it down and I read that this amenity is closed, so therefore we don't have any, homeowners in there. We don't have any public in there. So on that side of it, giving the contractor access to complete that job, I kind of don't see a problem with that. As long as there's the social distancing and everything's being adhered to. I might have a different answer if you told me they were working on an area that was populated and was open. I think my answer would be different. But in this particular case, the area is closed and it's an unpopulated area. So I think that
It
would
would
be okay.
seem to me that now, with that amenity closed, now would be the time to have any work done if you're able to. That way, it limits the frustration and limits the use after it supposedly can be reopened.
100% agree, Paul, 100%. And that's why I said I broke it down to this was a very specific, they stated unpopulated and closed area. So in that scenario, I think that's okay.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so we've got just a couple minutes left. Any other questions that people want to send in over the chat? All right, so just in case something comes over, in the meantime, so we do have the resources page there. Hopefully everybody is seeing that. So you can go, of course, to our website, fsresidential.com. There is literally a library. Again, I mentioned that we have a whole task force and our marketing team. They've put together some great information and papers and articles, everything related to coronavirus. So I would definitely check that out. And then, of course, there's links there for your specific state. And those links and, of course, our website will be on the follow-up email that we're going to be sending out that has the recording of this webinar. So you can definitely look for that. So make sure that, again, whether you're a First Service residential client or not, under these times for us, it doesn't matter. Please use those resources however you like. I do have one other question here. Do you have any thoughts on proceeding with we already had that. Jamie, do you have one? I think one
I
just
do
came
have one
in.
here that just came through. We have a condo community with a pool that is not staffed or monitored. How does this factor in the monitoring of social distancing, limiting the number of residents in the pool area, and sanitizing the pool, chairs, and tables? Again, my opinion, but I think, if you're going to reopen that pool and you're going to have to adhere to the local guidelines, I know that they have local guidelines where you have to clean every so often. I think you're going to have some kind of staff out there to take care of that for you. I think you're going to have to monitor how often that is done. So I know you don't have it staffed and monitored now, but I think that's something that you're going to have to think about. Do you have the resources to put someone there to monitor it? If you do, then maybe you can reopen it. If you don't, then maybe it's best that you just keep it closed.
Right. That makes sense. Okay, so we've got, we're just about at.
Via email. I'm sorry. Do we have just one more minute?
We've got a minute and a half.
From a manager. If the board opens facilities against management and government guidance, documented in the minutes, and then someone claims that they contracted the virus and files a lawsuit and also names First Service Residential, would First Service Residential policy have an exclusion? Well, so this is kind of a tricky question. They went against management and government guidance. So if they get named in a lawsuit, the first layer of protection there is going to be the association's policies. It's going to depend on whether they have that exclusion in there or not, as to whether there's coverage or not, and the allegations. If we're, so if you want to come down to our coverage, we're going to go to the association first because we were doing as directed by them. And even in this kind of scenario, the board opened against guidance. So, but could it fall back to our policy at some point? It could. Absolutely, it could.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Excellent. So we're up on time. I probably have on some days I have 2 or 3 either conference calls or webinar calls, and I've been doing that for months. And on every single one of those calls, there's always been somebody that wasn't muted or something happened in the background, what have you. We had 301 people on this webinar, and there was not one person that was unmuted or got interrupted in some way. So I commend everybody for being respectful and for not having that glitch. I know that we had a little bit of a snafu at the beginning with the slides, but looks like we worked that out. But Jamie, thank you so much. I appreciate all your help and your information today and taking the time. I appreciate everyone that took your time to be on this webinar as well. Keep in mind, we will be sending out the recording to everyone. If you are a First Service Residential client and you have more questions, reach out to your manager, the regional director, or the VP that you have a relationship with, and we'll make sure that we get your questions answered. If you are not currently partnered with First Service Residential, reach out to any of us. My email is paul.schwartz at fsresidential.com. And then you can reach us through our website as well. Any questions that you have, any way that we can help you what's going on, we would be more than happy to. So thank you so much for everybody for attending. I hope this was worthwhile, and we will talk with everyone soon, hopefully.